The Communist Manifesto was first published in the year 69 BR. That's before Revolution. That's 1848 for those who use the great imperialist calendar. It was written by Karl 11 Inches Marx and Frederick Engels. There's some other dank stuff to know about the history of it, but if you really care, you can dig up the preface by Engels pretty easily. I think I'll even drop it in the description for you. So we're just going to kickflip right into this shit. Marx opens up with a statement that basically crosses up today's liberal media right into the shadow realm, but as lit as it is, that's really the only part that still matters. I don't know what a Metternich or Guijat is, but I think they might be French people, but whatever. So, check this. Where's the party in opposition that has not been decried as communistic by its opponents in power? Apply that today. This is getting out of hand, guys. It's pretty out of control. There are people who actually buy this stuff. It's not like chili ring licking masochists either. Thousands of people regularly click on this crap and take it for news. It's unreal. But now it's time to get into the hard-hitting shit we've been looking for. So let's take a peek. The following is a simulation of the experience from the perspective of a Porky. Bourgeois and Proletarians, Chapter 1, is just a historical background of the bourgeoisie and how they smashed the feudal system and consolidated unilateral political sway. It related these developments to the foundation of America and the early stages of the Industrial Revolution, and serves as a prime example of the ever-evolving class relationships which define society to this day. Marx is dropping hints that the bourgeoisie has torn away from the family its sentimental veil and has reduced the family to a mere money relation. He says, quote, "The bourgeoisie has torn away from the family its sentimental veil and has reduced the family to a mere money relation." When I use page numbers, I'm going off the 2015 International Publishers edition of the Communist Manifesto, so... Page 12 is where the first really major and elaborated upon statement lies. This is critical to understanding the function of capitalism. Marx writes, "The need of a constantly expanding market for its products chases the bourgeoisie over the whole surface of the globe. It must nestle everywhere, settle everywhere, establish connections everywhere." I've noticed there are a decent handful of leftists who don't actually know what some of the contradictions of capitalism specifically are. The previous statement is a consequence of one of the most fundamental of these contradictions. David Harvey explains it pretty well in his lecture on the crisis of capitalism, but I'll paraphrase. As the bourgeoisie struggles to mitigate the tendency of rate of profit to fall, they resort to wage repression, which occurs uniformly across the world in waves. The current wave, beginning around 50 years AR, that's after revolution, and ending potentially in a couple years, but maybe not. It's hard to know. Well, it so happens that wages, beyond what the worker is compensated with for their labor power, are also what are generally used to buy goods. So if you suppress the input of money, there is a loss on the side of demand. Previously, the response to this has been what Marx described, the expansion of capitalism to new markets for the sale of goods. That is, the expansion of capitalism globally is an expression of an exhaustion of more localized markets. It's also an expression of the exhaustion of localized labor and natural resources, hence the greater basis of imperialism, but that's not discussed at great length in this book. However, capitalism had already essentially permeated every plausible market on Earth over the last century. The solution by the bourgeoisie this time around was the mass employment of credit economy to get around the problem of effective demand. This is the greater source of all the world's national and individual debt crises. We know that capitalism is incapable of actually solving its crises, and is only capable of moving them around geographically. The credit economy and accumulation of debt has taken the pressure off the problem of effective demand temporarily by ruining the lives of many individuals, but also ravaging the likes of Africa, as well as nations which have stared austerity in the face, such as Greece, Portugal, and Romania, and once upon a time, Yugoslavia, and we all know how that turned out. At the time of making this video, I checked, the United States is about $19,810 billion in debt, give or take. America will undoubtedly seek to resolve this pressure by raping and pillaging foreign nations, just as they have Yugoslavia, all of Africa, Southeastern Asia, the Middle East, and pretty much the rest of the world in the past. Marx closes this chapter by explaining how overproduction is remedied by, in addition to the aforementioned process, the periodic destruction and letting fallow of mass production capacities. Marx then lightly touches on some themes I think better covered in Wage, Labor, and Capital and Value, Price, and Profit, such as the perpetual subjugation of the proletariat by the bourgeoisie and the consolidation of the means of production in the hands of the bourgeoisie, among other things. He also foreshadows his theory of alienation, providing a synopsis of the separation of the feudal workers from their land, their means of production, by force or coercion, in order to enforce bourgeois class interests at their emergence. The chapter sets the tone for the rest of the manifesto, particularly with its themes concerning the bourgeoisie being the creators of their own means of destruction by facilitating the rise of the proletariat. I'd like to take the time to appreciate this poetic masterpiece towards the end of the chapter. The dangerous class, the social scum, lumpen proletariat, that passively rotting mass thrown off by the lower layers of old society, may, here and there, be swept into the movement by a proletarian revolution. Its conditions of life, however, prepare it far more for the part of a bribed tool of reactionary intrigue. Lumpens are the epitome of a collective benign tumor of the human race. If you are a lumpen, you belong in a garbage can. Do not be a lumpen. Proletarians and Communists, the next chapter, is a chapter concerned primarily with defining communism and its relationship to the proletarian class. Marx explains how the Communists characterize a representation of the interests of the proletariat as a whole, disregarding nationality and other petty distinctions, and they are ubiquitous among proletarian struggles throughout the world and throughout time in the capitalist era. The Communists are the most practical and resolute partisans of every country, and possess the greatest theoretical and pragmatic understanding of class struggle, capitalism, and the march towards proletarian liberation. From this chapter, we read the famous quote, "The theory of communism may be summed up in the single sentence: abolition of private property." Marx elaborates on the distinction between private property and personal property, and the lack of a need to address other forms of property relations. He talks about the wage laborer only creating capital and not his own property. He briefly explains the social connotations of capital and its distinctions from property. I really like this excerpt here. Communism deprives no man of the power to appropriate the products of society. All that it does is to deprive him of the power to subjugate the labor of others by means of such appropriation. It has been objected that upon the abolition of private property, all work will cease, and universal laziness will overtake us. According to this, bourgeois society ought long ago to have gone to the dogs through sheer idleness. For those of its members work, acquire nothing, and those who acquire anything do not work. The whole of this objection is but another tautology. There can no longer be any wage labor when there is no longer any capital. Marx goes on to elaborate on the proletarian interests of the abolition of the family, as well as the abolition of countries and nationalities. He stresses the practicality of dialectical materialism. I suggest you read this portion yourself for the finer points, beginning on page 26. This chapter is closed with a list of 10 explicit issues concerning the communists. Abolition of private property and rent, a heavy graduated income tax, abolition of all rights to inheritance, confiscation of the property of immigrants and rebels, centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank, centralization of the means of communication and transport in the hands of the state, extension of the means of production to the worker, the cultivation of fallow lands, and the planned improvement of soil quality. This last point is talked about at great length in Kropotkin's Conquest of Bread, if you've been interested in reading that. The next point is equal obligation of all to work, and establishment of industrial armies, a combination of agriculture and manufacturing industries, free education and abolition of child labor. Chapter 3, Socialist and Communist Literature, is largely dedicated to decrying counter-revolutionary pseudo-socialist doctrines such as clerical socialism and feudal socialism, which implicitly serve the aristocrats and not the proletarian class. Such is true also of what Marx calls petty bourgeois socialism and German, in triple quotes, true socialism, which he explained was created by select German philosophers under pressure from the bourgeoisie to undermine the actual communist ideology which serves the proletariat. Marx would later write the German ideology concerning a selection of these subversive philosophers. Marx then expresses the role of reformist ideologues in subverting socialism. He calls this conservative socialism, but in the modern day these are essentially the social democrats primarily. He writes, a part of the bourgeoisie is desirous of redressing social grievances in order to secure the continued existence of bourgeois society. Basically, reformism is crap, and reformists are crap for liking it. This chapter closes with a fairly lengthy discourse on what Marx calls critical utopian socialism and communism. I find this section convoluted personally, and I don't think I can really do it justice with an explanation, so if you're really interested, check it out yourself beginning on page 39. The fourth and final chapter isn't much, but a wrap-up and summary of the contemporary alliances, the then contemporary alliances of various communist groups. However, it closes the entirety of the manifesto beautifully. Quote, "The communists disdain to conceal their views and aims. They openly declare that their ends can be attained only by the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions. Let the ruling classes tremble at the communist revolution. The proletarians have nothing to lose but their chains. They have a world to win. Working men of all countries, unite." So there you have it, my dudes. Remember that Stalin did nothing wrong, God bless, and I'll see you next time.